The National Navy's Atlantic II was conducting a surveillance flight over the Baltic Sea when it was targeted by a Russian army radar. Look at what the French army says. We are victims of an attempted jamming as well as a designation by a fire control radar, according to a communication from the army. How does this work in practice, Xavier Titelman?
When a plane uses its radar, as is the case with the Atlantic II, which has a radar, when it is on maritime patrol, it is there to check that the ships present are not cutting cables again, as the Russians have done several times. So, it uses its own radar, jamming its radar. It means that the Russians are trying to emit a radar frequency that is exactly the same as that of the plane's radar, and as a result, it risks drowning out, and the ambient noise means it would no longer have an echo. So that's the first element. It can no longer carry out its mission. Luckily, some of our equipment can still withstand this type of jamming. The second element is that the Russians have illuminated the plane. What does that mean? A radar that will be, for example, on a boat, it will rotate 360 degrees, and so it does not particularly target us. But here, a radar designated the plane and followed it precisely. Normally, it's done so that the radar provides the missile with the information to hit this target, and the crew doesn't know if there's a missile coming at them at 6,000 kilometers per hour. There are precedents. Russia shot down an English plane over the Black Sea. Fortunately, the missile didn't work, but it was a manned plane at the time, a Sukhoi 27, that fired at an RC-135. Last month, they fired at a German helicopter over the Baltic Sea as well. So we have this accumulation of Russian aggression that is simply risking the lives of our men who had the wisdom and professionalism not to react, but they are really risking their lives.
We're talking about illumination. These are the words used by the Minister of the Armed Forces. He says that the patrol plane was illuminated by the fire control radar of a S-400 surface-to-air defense system. I'm asking you because illumination in military language is a specific term.
Can
explain it to our viewers?
As I was just saying, there are different types of radars. To illuminate, it means we're really going to lock onto a target. It's like the red dot of a sniper's scope is on your forehead. It means you're unsure if it will detonate instantly or if they'll eventually let their guard down. But that means in terms of military severity, you are legitimately entitled to respond. A minimum of illuminating you to your aggressor, who can shoot at you so much, but you won't necessarily have time to respond if he shoots because it's really too fast. Or to shoot as a precaution. So we are really on a level of aggression that is unprecedented, which did not exist during the Cold War because there was a certain balance that was made, and then there was no hegemonic or imperialist will or to expand on the part of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which is not the case with Russia today, which is very clearly vindictive and which repeats twice in a week its desire to re-annex the Baltic states. So we have this illumination which, in the plane, is actually an electronic warfare system. The ball on the tail and wing tips of the Atlantic II plane have the same design. I was a navigator on this device, so I know it well, and in the plane
there is a detector
that allows us to see that we are really enlightened.
Plane that, Xavier Titelman, you have been a detector and air navigator on board. We will see it on these images where they will arrive in a moment. What is the specificity of the Atlantic II? What was really the response of the French army on board this plane?
It's a plane that can do a lot of things. It's a plane that basically can drop buoys to listen to submarines. I have measured oil slicks. We have counted whales. There are many things we can do with this plane. Here, it came to do maritime surveillance to check that a fisherman in the area is not dropping a cable to hook and destroy a submarine cable. So, it checked 200 ships in a single patrol, since it can fly for 14 hours with 15 people on board the plane. It's a large plane from the National Navy that takes off from the ground, not an aircraft carrier. And so, when it goes into that area, we don't know if it's armed.
It took off from Brittany.
It took off from the MBWay base in the east. It actually went all the way there, but as it's a plane that flies for a very long time, it has the ability to make round trips. We carried out missions in the middle of the Atlantic, taking off from Senegal. We carried out 14-hour missions over Chad. It's a plane that can fly for a very long time. That's why there are 15 people on board to take turns. It's a highly sophisticated and modernized plane that has undergone several upgrades. Infrared cameras enable seeing with high-precision events occurring several tens of kilometers away. It has electronic warfare sensors. That's how we classify the type of radar locked onto us. That's what lets us know that it's not just a radar that was passing by. It's a firing radar from an air defense system called the S-400 that has missiles that can go roughly 300 kilometers away. That is to say, we are really in the possible interception bubble of Russia when we are in that area. Logically, all countries in the area can have radars, but militarily, even between allies and in exercises, it's not done.
What can be or what has been the response of the French army? How can we deter the enemy in these circumstances without getting into something frontal?
So once again, it was a ground-based missile from the Russians. That's a maritime patrol aircraft. So it has anti-ship missiles, it has torpedoes against submarines, and it has bombs that can glide to the ground about 70 kilometers away. But it doesn't have cruise missiles that would have been able to destroy the S-400 system that was illuminating us at that time. That is, it's shooting at us. We have the red dot of the sniper on our forehead. But we, with this plane alone, do not have the ability to respond. So, logically, what the English did after being shot at in 2022 is that all their planes are now accompanied by fighter planes capable of responding. That is to say, next time, if we have gusts that are deployed in the area for reassurance, since Russia regularly violates the airspaces of the countries in the region, maybe the gusts will have to patrol with the Atlantic too to be able to designate and explain to this missile targeting us, we too are capable of destroying if you also shoot. The gusts could be from the Swedish Gripen, Finnish F-18 or F-16S from regional countries.
We're going to see this French patrol in the Baltic Sea. It's important to remember what this patrol was doing in this area since it's a zone of Russian destabilization. You mentioned in particular these cables that have been cut, but also NATO officials have spoken on this subject.
I don't want to talk about this particular case, but in a way,
General, this
type of incident is quite common. It's serious and
it's going beyond the borders
of Europe.
He says it's widespread, while you pointed out the exceptional nature of what happened.
Luckily, the Russians don't shoot at us daily, but this doesn't happen every day either. What he means is that there is a repetition of increasingly serious incidents led by the Russians, and not just since the war. In 2013, they conducted a simulated attack in which they violated Swedish airspace, in which there were 2 strategic bombers and 4 fighters accompanying them, so 6 fighter planes entering the airspace to simulate an attack on air bases. So the Russians, while objectively we never violate Russian airspace, in 2022, the Russians flew a Sukhoi 27 into Swedish airspace with a nuclear bomb underneath the Sukhoi 27. We are at a high, catastrophic and dramatic level of seriousness. Yes, it's nearly the norm now. Except that since we didn't get into the habit of responding at the same level as their aggressions, we should have continued to do so. When Turkey had a Russian plane that violated its airspace in 2015, they shot it down. The consequence for Turkey was that they are no longer bothered.
For a while,
there are no more Russian planes violating Turkey's airspace. Today, you have Russian missiles violating the airspace of Poland, Romania. You have fighter planes in the Netherlands. You even have surveillance drones flying over Germany to inspect chemical and nuclear sites. We might ask ourselves, if we allow shooting them down, which country shoots down the most Russian cruise missiles? Belarus. Because when there's a stray Russian missile, they shoot it down.
Yes, but you see, Xavier Teitelman, the relationships are not the same. Turkey, Russia, as much as Russia, we are not at all in the same type of
possible discussion. Turkey is a NATO country, and an escalation between Turkey and Russia would have led to a war between Russia and NATO. Turkey's firmness stopped the Russians in the area. If tomorrow we decide to intercept and destroy all air vectors that illegally violate our airspace, it's legitimate. The Russians will respond in the same manner. If we show firmness, they stop trying to continue, to progress and to threaten us. But if we don't respond to threats today, they will keep escalating. The next time they shoot down, they shoot at a plane, will the missile by any chance not work, as it was the case with the British, because they fired a missile that did not work? We must realize the luck we had not to have a start of Third World War at that time.
So you don't believe in the logic of escalation?
But the Russians are trying to escalate. And as long as we back down at each of their provocations, they will go even further, destroy our submarine cables, attack our planes, violate our airspaces, drop thin bombs by chance. Sorry, there is a bomb that fell in Romania. So how come we are the only ones to accept this? Can we imagine a French Rafale violating Russian airspace? It would be shot down on the spot, and that would be normal.
Those who are no longer afraid are the Baltic countries, Xavier Teitelman, with Lithuania proposing participation in a NATO operation. Lithuanian ships are beginning to participate in the operation to protect critical infrastructure. And then the Lithuanians who say this during the mission, Lithuanian ships will perform patrol and surveillance tasks, cooperate with NATO allied forces, and use modern technologies to detect and prevent potential threats in time. Lithuania is therefore going to join long-term plans with NATO. Listen.
This corresponds perfectly to the requirements of the current NATO defense planning process. And we, with our division, we integrate. And this is not an exaggeration. We integrate into NATO's defense plans that are vital for our region.
You were in that area, Xavier Teitelman, just a few weeks ago, since in December, Lithuania, which has increased its gross domestic product, its increase in its
Gross domestic product allocated to defense?
gross domestic product allocated to defense. Thank you, Xavier Teitelman. 5.6% for the Lithuanians. Do you think they have a clear rationale compared to other European countries?
Well, they are on the front line. So logically, they are making more efforts than others because they are aware of the risk. We must not forget the events of the past 10 days. You have the vice president dedicated to the defense of the Duma who said it was logical that the Baltic states return to the Russian sphere. You don't have Trauschev, who is still Putin's #1 advisor, telling us officially that once Ukraine has disappeared, the Baltic states and Moldova will be annexed. In 2022, the Duma began working on revoking the recognition of independence for the Baltic states and Ukraine.
Some would tell you that these are just words.
No, precisely. The Russians are showing us that they are aligning their military aggression with their political doctrine, with their political will to annex these countries. Today, the poor were merely words. That's what they did with Ukraine. After flexing their muscles, they invaded Ukraine. There are plans that have leaked a very clear understanding of their invasion plan of these Baltic countries. It's 3 years of operational break with Ukraine, whether it's a ceasefire, a victory, or a defeat, 3 years of operational break. They recruit 800,000 men, produce thousands of armored vehicles, and launch a surprise attack faster than we can mobilize. Because in the area, we would have 2 or 3 brigades. 2 or 3 B grades facing 800,000 men. Obviously, we don't stand a chance. So these Baltic countries, they increase their defense budget to reach 5%. 5%. We are barely at 2%. We are obviously further away. But it corresponds to the seriousness of the threat they face. And today, I was there indeed. I have been in Estonia, and I have been aboard a national navy ship that is in the area, which is called the Southern Cross. And yes, they are on the front line, but also for demining something else, for the verification of navigation safety in this region. It's normal for all regional and European countries to participate in preventing this Russian escalation.
Is 5% enough, in your opinion? When we see the speed of production of the Russians at the moment, who also do not have the same relationship to work, there isn't a labor law for them, and then the young people can work even at night. When we are in this situation with the Baltic countries, which are directly confronted, is it clearly 5% enough?
For these countries, it's normal, since they are small countries that barely have 1 million inhabitants. And logically, they need to put a larger proportion of their gross domestic product to defend themselves. We will never reach 5%. If we reach 3% one day, it will be a normal level, given the level of threat. But I don't think we can reach that point fast. We must also recognize that Russia is currently producing 6,000 to 7,000 kamikaze drones daily. These are drones that cost €200. And us, if we were confronted with the Russians today, we also need to be able to develop this low-cost industry. Our anti-tank missile, the Acheron, it's great. It costs €300,000. Ukrainians can get a drone with optical fiber that has similar capabilities for under €1,000. So that means we have exceptional weapons, but they cost 300 times more than what the Russians and Ukrainians use to wage war today. So we don't necessarily need to multiply our defense spending by 10 to do 10 times better. We also need to be able to arm ourselves in the locus that allows us to obtain mass.
Indeed, we were also talking about Estonia, where you have gone Will it concretely be something that will change the game? Look, Estonia, which is therefore extending its protection of the maritime economic zone, the Navy in case of threat if necessary, has the right to resort to force in the entire maritime zone of Estonia, including in the economic zone. Is this a major turning point to do this?
No, it's relatively normal. What they are simply saying is that, yes, there is freedom of navigation in the area, since, a bit like in Turkey, obviously, you have to cross its territorial waters to pass the Bosphorus, to go from the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. Obviously, when you pass off the coast of Estonia and Finland, there is freedom of navigation, even though we are in maritime areas that are owned by these states. So if ever there is a riparian country, obviously Russia, which is aggressive, which passes in the area, which represents a threat, which breaks cables, and we finally decide to intercept their ship, it's something that would be normal and natural, because that's what Finland did. Finland intercepted one of the ships from the Russian Ghost Fleet. They were on board this civilian boat because they had just destroyed a cable. They discovered numerous intelligence systems on board designed to capture and gather intelligence against us.
So it's not as normal as it seems in the end, since it will help the Estonians to potentially detect surveillance materials or others.
If Russia resumes, Estonia will intercept its boats, even fake civilian ones, as Russia uses them. Some time ago, there was a French frigate in the area, it's not known what I'm going to tell you, which was flown over. Revelation.
On the set of LCI.
A French ship, a French frigate that was flown over in the area by a drone that was launched from a Russian civilian boat. We know very well what that means. So these Russian civilian boats that have attitudes that are intelligence, flying over a French frigate, it's not something that is normally done. We didn't even allow ourselves to intercept or destroy this drone, which, once again, does not represent any kind of threat. Small drones can now drop grenades, as evidenced by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. So this simply means that Estonia reserves the right to do what is right if there is a civilian ship, a fake Russian civilian ship that is threatening in the area.
Another threatened country, Romania, which launched F-16s after spotting Russian drones over Ukrainian cities near the Danube. One of the drones could have fallen on the Romanian coast. Look at what the Romanian Ministry of Defense is saying. Due to this situation, 2 F-16 planes from the Romanian Air Force took off from the 86th base of Borsia to monitor the air situation. Did these drones actually violate Romanian airspace? And what targets were these drones aiming at exactly?
So there is a port on the Danube that borders between Romania and Ukraine that is heavily used for exporting grain, etc. It's the port of Ismail that is here. So regularly the Russians shoot at this port of Ismail or try to shoot at it. And some of the Russian missiles, lacking the necessary precision, some of them fall on the other side of the border. And you have Russian missiles falling in Romania. So Romania launches its planes thinking if it ever gets through, we'll be able to intercept them. In the past, when it got through, they would just watch them go by and fall to the ground. What I find deplorable is that we are not able to offer Ukraine protection in this area. Since it's just 100 meters away on the other side, we could intercept and destroy these Russian drones. We lack the political will and are weak towards the Russians, not even allowing ourselves to intercept passing drones. However, there are instances where the Russians intentionally use and violate airspace, particularly Romania's. When they approach from the south discreetly, we observe them, hoping they won't attack us. But this allows them to strike Ukraine from a direction where its radars aren't focused. The Ukrainian radars are oriented in the area facing Russia. But when it comes from Romania, they are not ready. And we could intercept these missiles, but we don't.
Wait, I'm having trouble understanding. You mean on the Romanian side, we don't position anti-aircraft defenses or others for fear of Russia's reaction?
They are positioned, including the French, are present in the area with air defense systems without PT. And when Russia violates Romania's airspace, we don't intercept the missiles that pass. Not with the F-16s or the air defense systems. In this case, there was no violation of the airspace. They took off just in case it comes in, we destroy it. It would have been a first, but that was not the case today. But they can technically intercept these missiles just 2 kilometers away. An air defense missile as much, there we see on F-16s, it goes without problem to 20-30 kilometers. We could ensure the protection of Ukraine over 20-30 kilometers without even needing to penetrate into Ukrainian territory by staying within the air routes. Legitimately, one could say the Russian missiles that are coming, the Russian kamikaze drones that are coming, maybe they will fall on us in a minute and a half. Let's intercept them. This will close off the possibility for the Russians to bomb, once again, the civilian infrastructures that they attack every day.
Speaking of drones, Xavier Teitman, let's talk about the Iranians. Iranians received by Vladimir Putin today. Russia has asked Iran for drones again in exchange for nuclear technologies for Iran. We were talking about crossing the lines earlier. And indeed, Western intelligence said this in the Sunday Times, the British newspaper. As their strategic relations deepen and Russia depends on Iranian missiles and drones, there is fear that Moscow is about to cross these previously established red lines concerning the Iranian nuclear program. Crossing the red lines, after all, is a semantics we've been hearing since the beginning of this war. You were talking about firmness just now. Concretely, can this Iran-Russia alliance allow us to cross the red lines? Do you believe in it?
That's already happening, and it's going to speed up even more. And it's not just with Iran, it's also with North Korea. When we see the North Korean missiles that are being used today, we know that it's a derivative of the Russian Topol missile, a nuclear ballistic missile that has a range of several thousand kilometers. And we know, because they developed it in a year and a half, that it's not possible they did it themselves. The Russians are engaging in level proliferation. That is, they are going to give these dangerous and aggressive countries conventional weapons. Certainly North Korea will receive MiG-29. Certainly Iran will receive Sukhoi 35, which were rejected by Egypt, who finally chose to turn to the Rafales, and so much the better. And that means there is already a conventional force developing. But in addition, they are doing what is called proliferation. Proliferation for long-range missiles, giving them the ability to go further. So they're already violating treaties by buying missiles that go more than 300 kilometers from Iran. This is totally forbidden. They bragged about it, Lavrov said it. We allow ourselves to violate treaties and not ask the Security Council to violate treaties, while we, on our side, continue to only provide Ukraine with missiles that go 300 kilometers. Those we provide them could go further, but we restrict the capacity of our missiles. So one, they violate the treaties, they will continue to do so, and now it's almost an officialization of this technology transfer, one, on the ballistic, and two, potentially on the nuclear. Yes, it will be a red line, and what will be our response? The only response that the Russians will hear is each time they make a threat or they commit these criminal acts of violation of international treaties is to arm Ukraine more. If we had responded to each nuclear threat by providing Ukraine with 100,000 shells, 100 cruise missiles and 10 fighter jets, it would have been a firm dialogue. We want to re-establish dialogue with Russia via Trump? Well, firmness. The transfer of weapons to Ukraine, it's also a form of dialogue, and it's the only one that will work.
For now, the strategy is mainly to allow Ukrainians to produce themselves, also production of drones. We talk about Ukrainian manufacturing. We will see it on our screen today. 33 to 34% of weapons in Ukraine are of Ukrainian manufacture. Less than 30% come from Europe and 40% from the United States. These are the words of Volodymyr Zelensky. Is this a strategy that we're going to see in the long term? Trump is going to take power in just 2 days to become president of the United States. He has set up a power struggle while also discussing these well-known negotiations. You were talking about the ceasefire for 3 years with plans that would have leaked. Concretely, are we going towards this trajectory? That is to say, just allowing the Ukrainians to produce themselves?
Ukrainians must produce their own equipment due to insufficient supplies from use and because their materials are of superior quality. I am thinking, for example, of drones in which they are the ones making the revolution, they are the ones setting the example, and they are the best. We spotted a large drone that looks like the R-18, which we call the Baba Yaga family. It's a drone with a 30-kilo carrying capacity that can be used for bombing. Their drone, this drone, it costs 20,000 euros. In France, for 20,000 euros, we can't even make a small kamikaze ammunition. Clearly, they can produce a large quantity of mass. It's said that they produce a third of their own armament, but they produce more than 90% of the drones they will consume. So that's still a field in which they have become world champions. And they are the only country that knows how to produce drones today that are useful and effective against the Russians. Partnerships exist in other areas as well.
For example, French, German, Swedish companies which have supplied drones.
But there, industrial partnerships aim to enable local production of armored vehicles in Ukraine, for instance. And you have like that, Rheinmetall, the Swedes, etc., who produce on site, or then ammunition that is directly produced on site. It simplifies logistics. The Russians are not able to hit it because they continue to hit civilian infrastructure. We are still at 2,400 healthcare facilities that have been targeted by Russia, according to UN World Health Organization figures. The reduced missile strikes on Ukraine's military infrastructure and factories are a positive development.
Factories in Ukraine, but which are associated with NATO banners, since with German companies like Rheinmetall that you mentioned, is that also what makes the difference?
And if they could destroy them, the Russians would destroy them. When they destroy the UN's stock, on which there is the UN's Red Cross on the roof, the Red Cross warehouses, there is no doubt that the Russians know what they are hitting. So, if tomorrow they had the opportunity to destroy the airports from which Ukrainian fighter planes carry out dozens of missions a day, they would do it. So, there is this Ukrainian need to step up, because we are not stepping up, and the donations gave them 10 million euros. The production they will make for 10 million euros will be lower, infinitely higher than what we can provide for 10 million euros. A French patrol drone, it costs 20 million euros, so the Ukrainians do not have a drone equivalent to that one, because these drones are no longer relevant on the field today. However, they will be able to make hundreds and hundreds of drones, so there is also a strategic choice of orientation of the monetary flow. They do more with less money than us, so it's worth sometimes giving them the money, and they make a lot of small, cheap, low-cost armaments, rather than providing one or two pieces that will not necessarily make a difference.
I would also like us to talk about the field, about what is happening on the side, of course, since you will see it on these images. Volodymyr Zelensky has decorated the Ukrainian soldiers who were able to kill North Korean soldiers on the side, of course. It was a ceremony that took place today. The Ukrainians who continue to push on the side, of course, which is the Institute for the Study of War that reports this to us. You will see the Ukrainian armed forces can destroy the Democratic People's Republic of Korea military group in the Kursk region. The entire North Korean contingent of about 12,000 people currently in the Kursk Oblast could be killed or wounded in combat by mid-April 2025 if the North Korean forces continue to suffer from their high loss rate. In your opinion, concretely, how long can the Ukrainians keep Kursk? We know how important it is for negotiations.
Donald
Trump wants to implement. Can the Ukrainians still hold this territory for a while, especially until mid-April, as the United Steelworkers says?
From Ukraine's perspective, it's preferable for Russia to fight to regain its own land instead of invading more Ukrainian territory. The day there is a ceasefire, if the Russians fight and lose tens of thousands of men, that's the reality today. In Kursk, I have French people who have fought in the area. What they tell us is dramatic. It's of a terrible hardness. But facing them, they kill so many people that it's the balance. Statistically, it's worth continuing because the Russians put a lot of resources in the region with teams that are not necessarily at the same level. In the Kursk region, the Ukrainians, they have deployed Abrams tanks, Leopard tanks, so good quality tanks. They possess the appropriate artillery and a sufficient quantity of drones. And so that's why at the beginning, it dates back to August. Putin had said that by October, the 1st of October, this pocket should be cleaned up. It has been postponed to the end of the year. It has been postponed to early February. We are now in mid-January, and now we are talking finally it will hold until April. Yes, Ukraine is making a significant effort because 60,000 Russians and North Koreans are fighting for this area. If Ukrainians weren't fighting for this region, 60,000 more Russians would be invading Donbass or elsewhere.
Exactly. Do you think what's happening in Donbass is irreversible?
Donbass today is worth nothing because it's occupied, because it's destroyed, because the fields are filled with drone corpses. When a drone explodes, there are 10,000 a day exploding in the area. 10,000 a day, it's lead, it's cadmium, it's batteries for kamikaze drones. So the fields are unworkable, the cities are emptied and destroyed. Russia fights for ruined fields while Ukraine strives to protect its remaining cities from destruction. Yes, Ukraine today, it does not have the ability to recover Donbass militarily. It hopes to do so in 20, 30 years. They gave me the example, like Germany recovered East Germany after 50 years of occupation. We also simply give ourselves more time.
Thank you very much, Xavier Teitelman.
That was fascinating.
To hear you on all these topics, to get into the specifics, to really understand what these images that are shown to you mean.